Hey, this is Jacob, and in this video, we're going to be going over language learning versus language acquisition. Now, first, we're going to start off with language learning. So, as a general idea, language learning usually involves some kind of conscious studying. Now, this conscious studying can take on many different forms. It could be, going to like a school for language. Like I know for me, like back when I was in like elementary school as well as high school, I would have a teacher that would go and teach the class some Spanish. So, it could be like that. It could be like going to a special school to learn the language. It could also just be using like a language learning app. The whole idea is that you're mentally focusing your mind on trying to learn this language. So a lot of times this is learning about the language. So examples of that could be, learning about the sounds of the language, or learning about the words of the language, or learning about the grammar of the language. So when you learn about the language, it's almost like you're treating the language as some sort of specimen that you can sort of like dissect and try to figure out like how it works and how it functions. Also, when it comes to language learning, there's also often like a lot of exercises that you have to go through. So this could be like spelling exercises, grammar exercises, listening exercises, speaking exercises, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that, and especially like if you ever use the app Duolingo, I think it's a really good example of like doing these various exercises. One thing that people complain when it comes to Duolingo in particular is the fact that there seems to be like a lot of repetition, but that's kind of done on purpose, because when you can repeatedly get the right answer or get the right translation, so to speak, or whatever exercise that it is that you're doing, the idea is that over time, it just becomes sort of ingrained into you. Another thing in regards to language learning, that it may involve working with a teacher or a tutor. Now, that's not necessarily the case. You can definitely go for a more self-study method in regards to language learning. But traditionally speaking, learning a language usually involves like working with someone, whether that's like going to a school or just hiring a tutor that can help you with learning the language. And the last thing that I want to say in regards to learning a language is that apps have really made language learning much more accessible to a lot of people. I mentioned Duolingo previously, but there are tons of other different language learning apps. Like Closemaster, like Memorize, Babbel, Pimsleur. Like there's a ton of them out there. And with apps and mobile apps in particular, like it's very easy for you to just like download an app and begin the process of learning a language. So, that said, we're going to jump into language acquisition, which is a bit different compared to just like learning a language. So, the idea behind language acquisition is that you're picking up a language, quote unquote, naturally. And when I say naturally, I mean that in the sense that you're not going out of your way, so to speak, to pick up the language. It just sort of comes naturally to you. So, as opposed to learning about the language when it comes to language learning, in language acquisition, this generally involves learning in the language. So, this can involve just like hearing the language, reading it, and just sort of like immersing yourself in the language. Like a great example of this is like moving to a country, say like Spain, whatever, because you want to learn Spanish, and you just kind of surround yourself with people that speak Spanish. Like from your neighbors to the business people, to like what you watch on TV, and so on and so forth. Like the language is just kind of like around you like 24/7, and you just over time, like you just begin to pick it up, and you just begin to notice the patterns in the language that you're exposed to. Another thing in regards to language acquisition, which I don't think a lot of people fully appreciate, is the fact that you need thousands upon thousands of hours of exposure. This isn't one of those things where you can like listen to something or read something for like a few hours or whatever, and then you just pick up that language. Like in order to truly learn and really internalize a language, you have to have tons and tons of exposure to a language. And this is something I think some people, like when they try to like talk about comprehensible input, like they don't I don't think this point is really like emphasized enough at times. Like we don't like the amount of exposure that a baby, for instance, gets to like the language like over the years is why they're able to have such native like fluency with the language, because they're just constantly exposed to it like for like extensive periods of time. Another thing too is that when it comes to language acquisition, even though like some of the details are disputed about it, most most linguists agree like there are a set of predictable stages when it comes to like learning a language. So the first stage, just to make this very brief, the first stage is the pre-linguistic stage, which is from about 0 months to 12 months. This is basically where the baby is just babbling, and they're trying the best they can to like try to mimic the sounds of the language. Like it may just sound like babbling, it may seem like they're not really like making any sense, whatever, but there's actually a lot going on behind the scenes, which is helping them to grasp the sounds of the language and be able to make those sounds with their mouth, which is going to help them set the foundation for the later stages. Next, after the pre-linguistic stage, is what's called the hollow phrastic stage, which is about from 12 months to 18 months. Now, in this stage, this is where basically the baby is just using one word. Like they may just point at something and they say ball, or they point at that person and say like mom or like dad or whatever the case. Like basically at this point, the baby is basically reducing their thoughts to just one single word. Now, after the holophrasic stage, we have what's called the two-word stage, which is around 18 to 24 months. Now at this stage, this is where the baby is using like two words. So they'll say, so this could either take the form of like subject and verb or like subject and object. So it could be something like red ball, or I don't know, like black phone, or dad go, or like things like that. Like it's very basic, but now they're starting to conceptualize things a little bit more. Now at this point, after that, we have what's called the telegraphic stage, which is from 24 months to 30 months. So at this point, the baby is able to start forming sentences, but they tend to leave out like a lot of like articles, like they leave out like definite articles or like prepositions. So the way they speak, it almost sounds like a telegraph. So they may say something like daddy go store, like something like that. But they're starting to express more. So yeah, so they're expressing like more complex thoughts, but they're just kind of missing like some of those key function words. And then last is what we have, the multi-word stage. So this is from 30 months to 5 years. So at this point, the baby, or I should say the child at this point, they're at a position now where they can start expressing a lot more like complex thoughts, and they're starting to really start to build that foundation for being able to speak like an adult human being. But yeah, like their speaking has become more refined. They're using more of those function words and stuff. But yeah, now they're speaking a bit more coherently and at a point where it becomes a little bit easier to interact with them. So that's the language acquisition. So now you might be wondering, which is better between language learning as well as language acquisition? Like I just broke both of these things down. They're quite different from one another. So what should we do with this information? Now, in my opinion, you want to try and leverage both language learning and language acquisition. Now, one thing I do want to mention here, which I didn't mention previously, is that when it comes to the whole language acquisition thing, this is more so tailored to like how like a small child goes about like acquiring a language. So obviously, we're all adults right now, so it's not really possible for us to acquire a language in the same way that a baby would go about acquiring a language. Also, because we're adults and we already have a language that we already know, we can actually be a lot more efficient with our process as opposed to a baby, which is a bit more random and a little bit more haphazard, so to speak, and they're not really like in control of the process. It just sort of like happens to them, and they're more of a passive participant. But as adults, we can be a lot more intentional with how we go about acquiring and learning languages. Now, in my opinion, now these are rough percentages, is that you should spend anywhere from about 20% of your time on learning the language and 80% of your time like in the language. So when I say when you're spending 80% of your time in the language, I'm basically referring to like I'm consuming content, like creating what I like to call like an immersion bubble. So this could be like I'm reading a book or like listening to a podcast or watching a video, like any way where you can just sort of like get the language like from outside of you to inside of you. And you want to try to like spend a lot of time just being in the language, because it's only as you're in the language that you start to develop like that sort of intuition for how the language functions. Now, learning about the language is important and you can definitely get a lot of value out of that, but merely just learning about the language doesn't really give you that intuitive feel for how the language works. Like for instance, like when you learn like languages like Spanish or French, like they have very complex conjugations in their grammar. Now, it's possible that you can go and you can learn all of these conjugations, but it's much different matter entirely to be able to conjugate a verb the right way when you're doing it in spoken conversation, because everything is happening fast, and you got to like kind of think on your feet in a sense. But when you go and you spend a lot of time immersing in the language, like reading stuff, listening to stuff, you'll be in a much better position where you'll just know sort of naturally like how to speak and how to say something phrased in the right way, like as how a native would say it. Another thing too, which is I think is very useful, as a way to leverage both language learning and language acquisition, is to engage in what is called interactive reading slash listening. So this is a concept that I had learned from Refold. Basically, the idea behind this is like while you're going and you're like consuming concept, when you're consuming content, excuse me, whether that's like I'm reading a book or like watching a video, whatever, you want to take the time to really try to understand everything that you're listening and or reading. So one of the ways you can do that, so let's say if you're watching a video on your computer, you could use something that's called a pop-up dictionary. So you can like download this as an extension, like on Chrome and stuff. So once you go and you download that, you can go and you can look up words as you're like consuming the contents. Or if you notice like a particular grammar pattern that you don't understand, like in the content that you're consuming, you can look that up. Maybe you can like consult Chat GPT or something like that, just to like sort of break it down to you. And by doing that, you're able to get a lot more out of the content that you're consuming. And by being able to increase your comprehension by like really focusing hard on the content, when you decide to take like a more of a laid back approach to like consuming content, that stuff is going to make a lot more sense to you. So it is very mentally like draining, so to speak, like to do interactive reading slash listening. So you might only be able to do it like say like 10 to 15 minutes at first, like when you first start doing it. But it's a really good way to just really go and like go deep with whatever it is that you're listening and or reading to. And last but not least, as a good way to leverage both language learning and language acquisition, is I highly recommend picking one language learning app and completing the entire course for your target language. Now, there are a bunch of apps out there. Obviously there's Duolingo, there's Babbel, there's Pimsleur. Like there's a million of these apps out there. So my recommendation is just to choose an app that you like and that you enjoy. Like maybe you like how things are structured, maybe you like the resources or what have you. Like for me personally, like I really like using Duolingo. I use Duolingo for Spanish and French, and I've also used it to for Esperanto as well. So like the thing with Duolingo is that not every course gets like the same amount of time and attention. So like some courses in terms of quality are definitely a lot better than others. So if Duolingo is not a good fit for you, you can find whatever course has like the most ideal resources for your target language and just work through that course. I would recommend like try to work through that, do like use your language learning app anywhere from like 10, 15, 20 minutes a day. Just try to get into the habit of using that in addition to like spending time with the language via like consuming content, reading, listening, and stuff like that. So like really when it comes to like language learning and language acquisition, like by leveraging the best of both worlds, that's really what's going to help you get the best results and really just accelerate you on your language learning journey. So, anyways, that's all I have for you today in regards to this. Yeah, definitely let me know what you think down in the comments below in regards to language learning as well as language acquisition. Like, which one do you more like side with? Are you more of a language learner, or do you prefer more like the language acquisition part? And yeah, like if you enjoyed this video, if you subscribe, you'll be notified when I release some new videos like this. I try to release a new video every week in regards to language learning. My name is Jacob Laguerre. I'm signing off, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.